It's been a wild ride, but I am a lot better of a nuclear employee and a lot stronger of a nuclear advocate because of NAYGN.
The gravity of the time is such that every new avenue of peace, no matter how dimly discernible, should be explored. Never before in history has so much hope for so many people been gathered together in a single organization. You will provide a great share of the wisdom, of the courage, and the faith which can bring to this world lasting peace for all nations and happiness and well-being for all men.
Hello, Lee. Thank you so much for joining us on Titles of Nuclear. It's my pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for inviting me. It's good to be here as well.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay, so before we jump into our conversation, could you just give a background of yourself to the audience, please?
Yeah, so you have my name. I'm Lee Causey, and I wear a lot of hats. I'm an amateur yoga enthusiast. I'm a self-taught guitar player, but none of those pay for any bills. And so I'm here today because I'm the past president of the North American Young Generation of Nuclear, and I'm also an engineer for a utility in the United States called Duke Energy, and I've worked in the nuclear industry in both those capacities for the last 12 years or so.
And just to talk a bit about your experiences, what was your first introduction to the world of nuclear? How did you get into the industry?
Yeah. My first introduction to nuclear came when I was in high school, actually, my senior year. So I guess I was 17 or so. We had a senior exit report essay to write, and I chose, for reasons unknown now, the 3 Mile Island nuclear incident that happened in the United States,
Wow.
which I had already been interested in energy. I had been thinking about putting my time into a professional career in energy. I ended up going into engineering and focusing on energy. But I didn't know much about nuclear, and this was one of those big events that you've heard about, maybe references to as a young adult. You hear about it, but you don't really study it. And I wanted to take kind of a deeper dive into what actually happened, and such. And as an introduction to nuclear, that's probably not the introduction. If nuclear industry could speak for itself, it would say, if you want to meet up, don't start by reading about major events that have happened in the past, especially something that is arguably pretty outdated by now, right? You're going back 50 years to get to the 3 Mile Island incident, but nevertheless, that was my interest. And despite that introduction, I still ended up landing in nuclear as a career. But that landing was a little bit different of a runway track. So I was finishing my engineering degree at a university and wanted to find an internship my senior year to kind of get ready for a career in the energy industry. So I was looking at my local utility, which is again Duke Energy, and they had some spots open at a nuclear plant called the Robinson Nuclear Plant in the East Coast of the United States in the state of South Carolina. And never been nuclear plant before, but it sounded interesting enough, so I thought I'd try it out. And I ended up really liking it. And it's a learning curve. Nuclear is an interesting and complex beast, but it's not beyond anyone to understand it all. You just don't know because you would never run into it. It seems like without really diving in. So, but anyway, so I started working at a nuclear plant, and then liked it enough. They offered me a job when I left the internship, and I ended up signing on with Duke for some more and traveling around a couple other nuclear plants. And now I'm hooked, right? So now here we are. 12 years later. I never left nuclear. I went from just being an energy enthusiast with engineering talent to just being a nuclear advocate about full time. It seems so.
And it's actually really interesting because your first introduction to nuclear, I think it's fair to say that that is what most people, regular people, would be interested in when they want to learn about nuclear. They immediately go to the accident, and that is a horrible first impression to have. And
Yeah.
talking more about your time at Duke and an organization called NAYGN. So that is the North American Young Generation in Nuclear. So how did you get involved in this organization, and what capacity have you served in the organization?
Good. So NEYGN kind of found me. So maybe they're not great at advertising. I know some of our chapters do a really good job onboarding new employees, and maybe that's where they got me. So in my my first couple months working at a nuclear plant, the chapter president for the site at Harris Nuclear Plant I was at in Raleigh, North Carolina, came to me and said, welcome. And there's a lot of young people just like you here. And if you got some time, I'd like for you to meet them. And we met at a cocktail bar in Raleigh. I remember my first meeting of NAYGN capacity. And we had one of our executives from the site there talking about the importance of professional development and leadership in our industry. And I got to meet people who were, kind of like me. They're engineers that, you come out of the school, you think you're hot stuff and know everything. And then you start working and you realize you don't know anything. And that there's so many different ways to apply your knowledge and training, but also so many gaps left. What you need to learn about, like basic systems from nuclear power plants and how the real world operates. And I found that to be very welcoming. It's great running into peers. And that's kind of one of NAYGN's strengths I've found out over the last 12 years. But yeah, so my first year, they grabbed me and said, you should get engaged with us. And within 1 year, they said, you should really consider being one of our chapter officers. It's kind of a neat way to really dive in here. And so I got into what was called programs. So I got to develop some training content for employees on how to learn more about systems or processes. I remember setting up a tour of a lab that we used for material testing. Obviously, I don't know much about the lab, but by building the presentation and having to deliver it and working with the experts that do run the lab, I learned a lot about it. And it wasn't that the whole point after all, right? Of being part of this program. And so I think it just grew from there. And, our chapter expanded and my role kept going up and up. And then about 5 years ago or so, I joined the continental level of NAYGN. So that's leaving just the company I was at or the sites I was at and moving up to what I can do on the North America scale, which is a lot of work, and opened my eyes even bigger to what NAYGN does, and more importantly, what it can do. And so, in that run, I've been in charge of our benchmarking reports, our social media campaigns, our website design, and then getting into the presidency run and getting in with how we interact with other organizations, how we make a strategic plan for the year, how we interact with our chapters. And that brings me to my current role as past president, where I'm still on our board of directors. And I'm trying my best to just give everything any YGN could ask of me right back to it. So whether it's the not exciting stuff, like how to file our taxes as a nonprofit or how to update our bylaws and rules, to some really exciting stuff, like partnering with other great organizations like Women in Nuclear or the American Nuclear Society or the Nuclear Energy Institute. Big powerhouse organizations also doing great work, and sometimes with the exact same players on the chessboard, just by wearing a different hat. So it's been a wild ride, but I am a lot better of a nuclear employee and a lot stronger of a nuclear advocate because of NAYGN. So I don't know when this will stop. I might do this forever.
I think it's fair to say you've gone through all the cycles. You've gone from an outsider in the industry to just getting into it and then being completely immersed in it. And before we talk about the specific programs of NYGN, through your personal growth, have you come to better understand why some people don't really understand nuclear? As you said, as we kind of alluded to earlier, that people just made very bad first impressions, and it tends to stick. And I think that's the problem. It sticks too much, and they don't move past it. So, do you understand why some people don't really understand nuclear, and how has this shaped the way you talk about it with people who are outside the industry?
Yeah. So nuclear is kind of scary, and I've got two young girls, and they're gonna have to learn about fission at some point. But I don't know when you introduce nuclear fission to anybody in an exciting way. It's almost like you have to intentionally go look for it, which might be a fault of ours, right? Because the concepts are pretty simple, and none of this technology is anywhere near new. Like our grandparents could have very well been working in this heavily as well. But I think it gets a reputation of being only for super smart rocket scientists or reactor engineers or whatever you want to label them. People who worked on the Manhattan Project or something are the only kind of minds that can really understand this. And they miss the community aspect of it. Like, honestly, it's just neighbors. It's people working in human resources, people working in maintenance, people that move wrenches and turn valves on and off. You got scientists who are studying water chemistry, and you got engineers like me that I don't do anything with radiation ever. My job is to replace equipment it's everywhere, valves and pumps and motors and heat exchangers, and it's like any other power plant out there. In fact, 2/3 of it is exactly like every other power plant out there. You still have a turbine that's got to spin. You got to put some steam on it, and you got to have a generator running the lights around town. But so I think the problem is it just looks so complicated, and at face value, maybe it is. But I'll tell you, I don't think it's beyond anybody. And so when you want to talk about it, I wouldn't dive in on how fission works and what uranium-235 is used for. And let's first cover the periodic table of elements, as give you some nightmares from your chemistry classes. And instead you focus on the stuff they really understand. Like, hey, what are your thoughts about climate change? Or what do you think about the jobs in our area? Where do you think you'd like your kids to work one day? And do you know where your power comes from right now? And these are all kind of relatable questions that's probably as far as you need to go to talk about nuclear power with someone. If they want to dive in more, they'll ask the questions. I would never go in thinking like, here, I know exactly what you want to know. You want to know, what tritium is. No problem. Let's talk about it. So that's never the case, right? They probably just want to know about you and what your job is, and why it should matter to them. So this is something we think about a lot in NAYGN is how do you advocate for this industry? And it depends what country you're in and what the political landscape is like. And it depends also what region you're in, if they have any kind of energy policy or clean energy plan. And those could all be the starting points for your conversation, right? I live in North Carolina on the East Coast of the United States, and we have a plan to be carbon neutral by the year 2050. Which is, got a lot of popular support. There's a reason why we picked that, right? Our residents want that. And we're not even that liberal or left wing of a state. We're probably more right wing, but nevertheless, there's a general consensus that, climate change is a serious thing and our energy production is contributing to it, and we can fix it. We have the tools and technology. Solar is cool, wind is cool, let's use it. And so what I think of is like, well, where does most of your clean energy come from now? And if you ever ask that question, generally people don't know. But where I live, depending on what year it is, I guess, but about 1/3 of all of our power comes from nuclear power plants. So it's like, well, there you go. Most of your clean energy right now is nuclear power plants. And you got like another 5% of your power comes from renewable energy sources. And, that doesn't mean I'm anti-renewable. Renewables are actually great. If we could do the whole world like that, man, wouldn't that be cool? But the reality is, we as humans love our power, and it only seems to grow with all we want to electrify, and for good reason. It's making life a lot better. I had a professor in college, a differential equations professor, who studied goodness, and he had this famous line about, the best society is one where the person at the lowest level has the most. And it doesn't mean a complete reversal of communism. That just means, what's your minimum bar for the people that live there with you? And I think about that a lot, and about why it's important to provide energy as where we can and to electrify. And you don't want to stunt this growth, this development, these advances, right? These are great things. And you get into clean drinking water and all kinds of directions with this. But all that to say, electricity is here to stay, and it'll only grow. And if you're going to do that, it's going to take a lot of energy to get there, and you're going to need a variety of sources. And so far, and at least in the United States, nuclear, and in many places across the world, nuclear has been your heavy lifter of all this, and will probably continue to be, because we're actually only getting better at this. And the next generation of reactors is even more exciting. If you hear about names like TerraPower or NuScale or Oklo or all the other neat labs and reactor designs out there that are, a whole nother level from what we have now, and much more efficient, much easier to build, much simpler designs. It's fascinating. It's going to be a fascinating future. And so buckle up. It'll be a fun ride. Nuclear's got a fun ride in store for you.
Yeah. I can tell by just the brief conversation so far that you're really comfortable about talking about this with people, because I think that's somewhere where the disconnect is. People know so much about the industry, but they don't know how to communicate it properly. And I'm curious how this plays into the programs that NYGN organizes, because you guys have some very interesting programs. I've even seen some children's books that you guys are producing. So what are the unique programs that NYGN really supports and tries to advocate for nuclear in the space?
Yeah, so NYGN's strategy for advocating has evolved, appropriately evolved. So it's very easy to think, to share great ideas about nuclear with people already in the industry. But that's not really changing minds. That's an important part. It's reinforcing ideas and concepts, make sure everyone stays educated. But the people you got to reach are the people that will never ask you a question. You'll never meet them. They don't live near a nuclear power plant. They just don't care, right? And how do you get to those people? It won't be in their science textbook. And so there's a lot of ways. And the bread and butter for us is going out to schools and just talking what you do for a living, kind of like career day stuff. Or you go when they're studying electricity, or when they're studying the atom or chemistry or something, and just go and show you're a real person, you're a real neighbor. And then this is what you do. I work in a nuclear power plant. We provide clean energy for this town you live in and this very school you're in right now. And if you just start with that, you'll get a question like, is it dangerous? Do you go green? Will it blow up? All those kinds of fun questions. But that's such a great starting point, right? At least they're showing some interest. And if all they know about nuclear before you got there was Homer Simpson or Fukushima, or whatever you want to call it, it's like, well, aren't you glad you showed up? Because you can be one more data point for them of what nuclear is like, and you'll be a much more real example than what they're going to get somewhere in a movie like a Godzilla film or something. But when you think about, so how does NAYGN apply all this? So other than school outreach, you mentioned the children's book. I don't know if I can actually have a copy sitting here. So this is Marie's Electric Adventure. And it's about a little girl whose power goes out during a storm, and which means her nightlight goes out, which can be scary. And I have 2 young girls, so it is. If the nightlight goes out and there's a storm, it's scary. And so she decides to take her dog and go solve this with a bit of bravery. And she just follows the power lines to the fence of a power plant. It turns out to be a nuclear power plant. So we have like a page that talks briefly how nuclear power works. But really, it's about the concept of your light in your house had to come from somewhere. These are what the power lines are doing. But ultimately, what kind of plant does it land on? And for a lot of people, it's probably a nuclear power plant, especially if it's a clean energy source for you. And I think getting just those subtle concepts are great. We also published a second book called George's Energy Adventure, and he has a science fair project essentially at his school where he has to decide how to power his fictional town. And he goes through all the major types of power generation and what's great about them and what's not great about them. And, we'll see where he lands, right? But it wasn't about, hey, nuclear all in your face, we're the best in the world, because that's not the message. The message is nuclear is part of an energy mix, and it's part of your energy mix right now. And as long as you're aware of that and thinking through it, you got to think about how diverse we are. And that's all the introduction you need, right? It's very, I once toured a Harley Davidson motorcycle factory. This is just a little segue. They have a children's book too. And it is like just a huge ad campaign for motorcycles and the Harley Davidson brand and everything. And it's kind of neat if you're a big fan already, but if you weren't already a fan, it's not going to change your mind, right? You wouldn't even buy the book because it just seems like a bunch of ads. So, we're trying to mimic that. We're not trying to be in your face. We also don't. One more thing about this, and then I'll let you move on. But
Okay.
so when you think about how to really make a difference, another great one is how do you interact with the policymakers of your government or your region or your town. And so if you're a large company and you put some money behind it, you'll have people that go in the United States, start Capitol Hill, and they go and talk to representatives or members of their staff about issues or certain bills. And that's all well and good. And there's a big part of that for the world to make great change. But don't forget about the local levels, right? So for my state, there are representatives that have no energy policy or ideas at all on their platform. They don't run and talk about energy at all. They're normal people. Maybe they worked at a hospital, maybe they were a lawyer, maybe they were a social worker for years, and they just got into community politics and wanted to make a difference. That doesn't mean they know everything. In fact, I can guarantee they don't know everything, especially about nuclear energy. And so people like that are great people to engage with and say, hey, I just want to let you know, you live in North Carolina. About a third of all our power comes from nuclear power plants. They have a great effect on having a high base pay rate for employees that live there. Their employees volunteer in local schools and they clean up parks. Here's some of the stuff we've been doing. If you'd like a tour someday to learn some more, here's my card. We can talk about it some more. And that kind of introduction, so they realize that the people that they're representing in a democracy, in government anyway, the people that they are representing, are behind some of this, and that they work in these kind of fields. They work in nuclear. And those little bits, that makes a huge difference. You don't always have to shoot for the top of I'm going to change some nationwide law on how we do energy policy. It's all built from the bottom up, grassroots style, right? Mm-hmm. So I would say that would underline most of all what NAYGN strategy is. How can we as a grassroots organization really impact change? And it's not a website, it's not a big letter to a representative, it's conversations one at a time, trying to reach out to people and make sure they're aware of the facts.
Something that is very, very interesting about NYGN is the fact that you're not only focusing on developing the young talent in the nuclear industry, you're also really focused on breaking out of that bubble or really getting people more involved with the conversation. But now looking a bit inwards, young people generally have a bit less interest when it comes to STEM degrees and things that have to do with technologies, and there has been a lot of advocacy work to get them interested and let them know, okay, it pays well, it's a very good industry and all these things. Yeah. But when it comes to nuclear, I think this is something that has its own peculiar story. So what is it like for young people in the nuclear industry right now? Do they still see nuclear as something attractive that they want to be in, especially when they care so much about climate change, but they don't connect the dots that nuclear is a solution to climate change? So how has that been for you in your experiences?
Great question. So we survey our membership every 2 years to pull and actually we help answer this exact question about, kind of what are you excited about with the future of nuclear? And the older group, older being like, 30 people my age or a little, about my age or so, they'll who've been working in the industry a little while, they'll say, oh, well, we're excited about extending licenses because that means our current plants will keep operating longer and we'll get to keep providing clean energy. But our youngest members, and especially our university students, they're most excited about new technology. They want to see innovation and they want to see the hope of change. And that's such a great message to get behind. And if you're in the older guard and you're thinking more about maintaining your current fleet, these two ideas mesh pretty well. I happen to, in the United States, we have a very distinctive president right now who's very big into nationalism, which has its own place, of course. But when you think about supporting nuclear technology, and there could be a great place for this of like, well, it could be a prideful thing for your country to make these kind of designs and then build them and put them into action and actually build something in-house versus bringing in other countries' ideas and engineers into your country. So I guess all to say, you got to remember how exciting change and innovation can be for people. And if you're trying to get someone into nuclear by talking about how great we've been and we're going to maintain that status quo, and we've always been safe, and we're going to keep being safe. That's not drawing people into this career. And no, the word nuclear will always, for whatever reason, still have a negative connotation. It wasn't that many years ago that HBO released the Chernobyl miniseries, and it was a historical event. Certainly learned a lot from it. It was horrible that it happened, but here we are. Whatever, is it 86? I don't remember what year it was, but many decades later, and it's still coming up into the forefront of pop culture when you Google the word nuclear. And so because of that, there'll always be some challenge for people that aren't familiar with the industry to come into it, because it doesn't sound like the future. It sounds like the past. And it sounds like it could be, risky or something. But the reality is, it ain't nothing like that. Reality is, it's like any other utility. It's super stable. It's tried its very best to be, reliable and steady. And, if you live in the United States, for a lot of the regions, you don't even know what a blackout is, right? Unless your power line goes down, you don't even understand what rolling brownouts are like or anything. You don't realize how great you have it. But a lot of that is nothing related to power, not just transmission lines. But the reality is, our nuclear plants are fantastic and they're great at running, but that's not what young people want to hear. They want to hear what cool stuff are you doing. And so hopefully we start moving more in that direction. So there's some great examples right now with how are we moving into digital systems or remote equipment monitoring, using drones to do inspections inside the containment building. There's some cool stuff. So I hope people are seeing some of this, but it may not make the local newspaper headlines as well.
And it's something that you mentioned earlier a bit about all the new technology that's coming up. And it's something that will excite the younger generation, because that's what people want to care about. They want to see innovation and they want to see what part they can play, and being impactful is the word that gets thrown around, and they want to make an actual impact. So how does the organization really help the young people really grow their careers in this? Because it's something you've already given your own personal account, but how does it do it more broadly for other people in the nuclear industry?
Absolutely. So NYGN tries to support our members that are willing to make an impact. And we do this in a lot of ways. So the first one is amplification. If you have a great message or a great presentation you put together or some great ideas, we can help you reach a broader audience, whether that's just other people outside your region, if you want to expand your team or get a bigger audience that way. It could be our tie-ins with other organizations or leaders in the industry to gain some interest. And for the past few years, we've given money to help promote some great ideas. And those can range from building a Nuclear 101 course for teachers, essentially for local community teachers to learn more about nuclear. We have members that have built teacher workshops to bring teachers in and cover the curriculum to help bring them back to their students, or getting help getting Boy Scout merit badges related to nuclear energy, or whether it's maybe something more technical. We worked for a while on building a database to help with knowledge transfer, or maybe it's setting up a mentoring program or an onboarding program for new employees that come into the nuclear industry. And so part of its implication, part of it's maybe financial sponsoring. But there's something to be said for just sharing great ideas, because we're all kind of facing the same challenges day to day in nuclear operation, and they're all solvable, but we may end up with different solutions. It's like a multivariable calculus, I guess. There's oftentimes multiple solutions to one problem, and some are better than others, and we can help share great ideas. That's what we try to do very hard with our social media platform and getting our members involved. All of our chapters meet every month to talk about best practices. We have a website where we post articles of great things chapters are doing. And I know other members have found it inspirational. And you start seeing, well, we should do a chili cook-off at our site, or whatever. This is all real examples, but you think about how do we keep people engaged with the industry, so those kind of networking events are actually very important to the health of an industry. And sharing those kind of ideas is what NAYGN is getting pretty comfortable at doing.
You obviously care very deeply about this, and I'm very curious to know what excites you for the future of the nuclear industry. What do you see happening, or what trends do you see that just makes you optimistic for what the future holds for young generation and the old generation, the old guard, as you put it?
Yeah. So there are a couple of things that are pretty exciting about our future in the nuclear energy industry. And the first one is all the clean energy plants you see popping up around the world that are expanding beyond just the renewable conversation, and they're moving into the clean conversation because they're recognizing there's something other than renewable energy sources that can really help us and continue to help us with climate change. And seeing where I started 12 years ago, where we had a faux nuclear renaissance in the United States, we were supposed to start building all these reactors and didn't, and then seeing a lot of rise in industry in solar and wind, but not a lot in what's already being great for the same goal. Well, we're shifting from that. So I like seeing a policy that recognizes the value of nuclear, and that's only going to keep growing. But that's a silly one, but it's definitely one on my list, right? My future will depend on policy, because policy will beat economics any day. I'm excited about some of our cool reactor designs. If you haven't Googled molten salt reactor yet, that is a fantastic idea. And it's a super fascinating technology. And it's not overly complicated, but like knowing that salt even turns to a liquid. But then what do you do with that salt? How do they use it to make a reactor work? It's worth a couple minutes of your time to find a cool video on that. And then the third one is our change in how we distribute power. So one of the bright futures of nuclear right now is a small modular reactor, SMR. Fancy word for saying small power plant, right? So we're going to have these small power plants that are cheaper to build, but we're moving away from the big Herculean power plants we have now that are like huge energy hubs with a spider web of power lines coming out of it to distribute it all over the place, and huge high voltage lines, to where you could have local power sources. Like maybe the famous example is always the remote Alaskan town in the United States that runs currently off a diesel generator sitting in the middle of the town. You could pop one of these small power plants in there, a small reactor in there, and power them for years. You never have to refuel it, for years down the road. It's super safe, super compact. It's a fascinating idea. And it's becoming more than an idea. We're starting to see some actual licenses come through where we could build some of these, and that'll really change the landscape. We've been decentralizing power sources for a while. Thanks a lot to renewables for helping us get there, because they have all these relatively smaller pods of solar panels or a wind farm or something that's kind of making power come from different places than it used to, which is great. And nuclear is replying in kind by helping us get there, of putting power kind of where you need it instead of having to ship it there.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. Lee Causey, thank you so much for joining me on Heads of Nuclear. I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for being here.
You bet, bud. Hope you have a great week.
And initiate at least a new approach to the many difficult problems that must be solved in both private and public conversation if the world is to shake off the inertia imposed by fear and is to make positive progress toward peace.